email at ron.cobb@boston.gov and will be made a part of the record and available to all counselors. Today's hearing is on docket 0296, order for a hearing regarding the biannual review of the Boston Employment Commission and Boston Jobs Residency Policy. We are joined by the following panelists. Panel one is Andrea Lima, Deputy Director of Supplier Diversity / BRJP Unit, Christopher Brown, Manager of the Boston Jobs Residency Policy, JC Cole, Burton of the Boston Employment Commission, Charlie Cofield of the Boston Employment Commission. And panel two are advocates, Angela Williams-Mitchell of the Boston Jobs Coalition, Renee Dozier from IBEW 103, and Dorcia Jones, Roxbury Community Organizer. I will just also note that we are going to move things along and we're going to be really tight on time. And I'm going to just give an opportunity to the lead sponsors to open up with welcome remarks and then hand it over to my colleagues and you can incorporate your opening remarks and questions at that time. So we're going to kick things off with the lead sponsor, Councilor Louis Jean. Now you have the floor.
Awesome. Thank you, Councilor Mejia, for chairing this hearing. I also want to thank members of the administration and the Boston Employment Commission and advocates who are here to give testimony. We filed this hearing as part of the biannual review of the Boston Residents Job Policy, which is the City Council has been mandated to review to make sure we are complying and living up to the promise of the Boston Residents Job Policy. We wouldn't be here without the likes of Chuck Turner, who really spearheaded this effort to make sure that people in our city, Black folks, women, Boston residents, could share in the prosperity of a very wealthy city when we are talking about construction jobs. And we've seen the Boston Residents Job Policy evolve in 2017, and we've seen some progress, but there are continued challenges in ensuring that that residents here, that women and that people of color are able to work on these very lucrative jobs and have family-sustaining careers. And so I'm really excited about the folks who are here today. I'll note that the sponsors of this are myself, Tanya Fernandez-Anderson, and Brian Worrell, all three new city councilors. And I think this is an important opportunity for us to really learn about where the city is with the Boston Residents Job Policy. The current requirement under the BRJP, city-funded projects and private construction jobs of 50,000 square feet or more are required to have a workforce that's at least 40% people of color, 12% women, and 51% Boston resident. We know that there's been progress on some of those numbers, and some of those numbers are more challenging to meet. And that in 2021, a GBH News study found that of the 150 projects in Boston in the last 5 years, less than a third met racial equity goals, and none met the goals for women, and three projects met the goals for city residents. So there's a lot of work to do, but I'm really, I take everything as an opportunity. We have a new administration. We have city councilors really rooted in the work of equity and making sure that our residents who have been historically excluded, especially Black folks, from these projects and from the shared prosperity of the city can really buy in. And so, we take this as an opportunity to really see where we can lean in and do the work of getting more people on these jobs, of getting more people into the trades, of improving Madison Park and improving job training opportunities. So I'm really excited. We have people on this panel who have been in this game and at this work for a long time. So I'm excited to learn from you all and to see what we can do and how we can actually make these biannual reporting, how we can make it meaningful, and how we can have attainable goal setting. So want to thank everyone for being here and excited for the conversation.
Thank you, Councilor Louis Jean, for setting the framework for what this conversation is going to look like. I also just want to be super mindful as we continue to move forward. Each panelist is going to have a certain amount of time to speak, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So if you don't get through your entire presentation during your time, know that there will be an opportunity for you to add during the question and answer portion of it. And in the spirit of trying to keep things along, I'm going to move over now to Councilor Worrell. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my co-sponsors, Councilor Louis Jen and Councilor Anderson, and thank you to the panel and for the advocates that's doing this great work. The Black and Brown Economic Empowerment Agenda is my #1 priority, and focusing on creating systems that are producing economic mobility for Black and Brown communities, centered around data, accountability, engagement, and collaboration is how I believe we get there. The structures we create needs to produce the equitable results that we are defining, and that's here in this ordinance. To no surprise, my community needs these good paying jobs. The jobs at these construction sites are great paying jobs with benefits that equip individuals with skills that they can take anywhere. I would also like to know that it's not just enough to have a diverse workforce. There are instances where Black and brown workers make it on the job site, are given the lowest paid jobs. According to a report in the New York Times, there is a stark difference in jobs that whites and people of color get. Workers of color in 2020 did 70% of the work removing asbestos, where the mandated base wage set for projects like that like the City Hall renovation is usually around $40 an hour. By contrast, workers of color only got 22% of the plumber hours, which paid around $60 an hour. I'm looking forward to having a conversation around increasing the diversity in our unions and what penalties we can enact on contractors that are non-compliant, increasing resources to the Boston Employment Commission, and learning from those unions that have diversified and from union members that have successfully gone through the apprenticeship program. This will help us understand what supports, processes, and outreach needs to be done in order to reach the goal of having more Bostonians and more Black and brown communities benefiting from the development of our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Morell. I'm Councilor Tanya Fernandez-Anderson. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my co-sponsors, Councilor Lujan and Councilor Morell. Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited about this hearing order and looking forward to speaking with you. Thank you to the administration partners who have been doing this work, and hopefully we can start talking about exactly how to partner with the council in order for us to support you in engaging the community in a real way, right? So intentionality or action should follow intentionality. And I'm really looking forward to see what so far are your barriers or struggles or challenges in finding Black and brown people to work in this. I have to thank Ms. Dorothea Jones, Ms. Angela Williams as well for the Oversight Committee that in the work, and all of the members for the Oversight Committee who've been doing this work for years. And just, I have to say that the data looks extremely concerning. And again, looking forward to learning about why that is and exactly how we can do that to remedy that situation. Thank you so much, and let's do the work.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn the conversation now over to the panel, and we'll start by hearing first from the administration, presentations from the administration and the Boston Employment Commission, followed by questions from our council colleagues, and we'll then hear testimony from our second panel, followed by questions. We'll close out the public testimony. I ask that our panelists please keep their remarks to no more than 5 minutes, and you will be timed, as we have a large number of people speaking here today, and we're trying to keep the conversation moving. So I will start off with Andre Lima, the Deputy Director of Supplier and Diversity and for the BRJP unit. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Councilor. I'm having a little bit of trouble sharing my screen. We prepared some slides. I don't know if Chris or anyone else has those that might be able to share on the sort of like on the council side. I'm just having a little bit of trouble doing it from my computer.
And I don't have the power to make you a co-host, so Ron, maybe you could help us out here, please. We're going to give you some extra additional power here, Andre. There you go.
Oh, wonderful.
The floor is yours.
So thank you so much. So I'll just say slide when we can move to the next slide. I really appreciate the help. Great. So my name is Andre Lima. I am the Deputy Director of the city's Supplier Diversity Program and the Boston Residents Jobs Policy Office. I'm joined by Christopher Brown, who's the BRJP Manager. Before we dive into some of the project data, I kind of wanted to give a brief overview of the ordinance itself, although Councilor Louis-Jean has actually already provided a really great summary of that. So I'll try to move through this pretty quickly. We can move to the next slide. And we can actually continue to, I think, slide 3 or 4. Yeah, 2 more. Great. So again, just a brief history. In 1983, the original ordinance was approved, and which set employment standards for Boston residents, people of color, and women construction workers. The original ordinance applied to private development projects over 100,000 square feet and any public projects. Those projects had to meet the following employment standards. 50% of the total work hours in each trade had to go to Boston residents, 25% of the work hours in each trade to people of color, and 10% of the total work hours in each trade to women. We can move to the next slide. In 1985, the ordinance was extended by executive order, and then on January 25th, 2017, the ordinance was amended and new employment standards were set. So for the ordinance that we are now working off of, private development projects over 50,000 square feet and any public development projects must meet a new set of employment standards, which are 51% of total work hours going to Boston residents, 40% to people of color, and 12% to women. And additionally, the new ordinance sets goals for apprentices. So where apprenticeship programs are in place, the share of apprentices on a project should mirror those employment standards, 51, 40, 12. And I think it's worth noting here, we use this term total work hours. The unit measurement for performance on BRJP projects is actually hours worked by Boston residents, people of color, and women. That's just a point of clarification to give the council a sense of how we actually track the performance of contractors on BRJP projects. So we can move forward 1 slide. Additionally, the updated ordinance established 7 compliance measures that contractors must perform. These are attending pre-construction meetings, providing weekly certified payrolls. That's the vehicle through which we collect those work hours so that we can judge performance against the employment standards. Attending corrective action meetings, appearing at BEC hearings when requested, providing communications and confirmations to construction monitors who are monitoring the projects, providing referrals to the jobs bank. We will get into the jobs a little bit later, and verifying Boston residents who are working on monitored projects as Boston residents. I wanted to take a moment to pause here just because, just to clarify that with respect to compliance with the ordinance, we're actually talking about a contractor's compliance or non-compliance with these 7 compliance measures, and not achievement of the 51, 40, 12% employment goals. So practically speaking, that does mean that there may be contractors who are below the employment standards. So for a given project that's monitored by BRJP, a contractor might not be achieving that 51, 40, 12 demographic split. But if they are meeting these 7 compliance requirements, they are technically in compliance with the ordinance. And that's sort of one of the nuances of this ordinance that I just wanted to call out before continuing. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Christopher Brown, who's going to take us through the actual project data for the past 6 or so months since our last biannual hearing. So we can move forward.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Andre. So I'm just going to jump right into the numbers. These percentages are from the last 6 months. And so what you're looking at now is you're looking at all the projects that were active from October 2021 up until March of 22. We had 97 total projects within that period of time. 27 of those projects were developmental impacted projects. Those are the private projects. And in general, those are like the skyscrapers right in the Seaport area. Those projects are, over 100,000 square feet. We had 70 City of Boston projects. Those are the public projects. And those are the projects that received some type of funding, either in full or partially. So we had 7. You see all the different line departments that we have for public projects. We have public facilities department. That deals with city buildings. We had 18. Then we have parks that relates to city parks. We had 6 projects. Public works, that would be sidewalks and streets, so forth and so on. We had 13. And the Department of Neighborhood Development line department, we had 33 projects. And those are like the housing projects that you see within the neighborhoods. So then you have a breakdown of private projects. Those are the projects that are over 100,000 square feet. In general, each year, the private projects, because they're so big, they log the most hours. As you can see, with this last 6-month period, we had 2 million hours, 2,600,000 hours. And, they came in at 24% resident, 34% people of color, and 8% female. Then the public projects, their hours are, as a whole, are lower. And the percentage is 30% Boston resident, 48% people of color, and 7% female. So when you add the private and public projects together, you're gonna get the total. And we had over 3 million hours within this last 6-month period. And the grand total of all projects is, the number is 26% Boston resident, 37% people of color, and 8% female. And I'm happy to say that's the first time that we really met that 8% mark. The numbers in the women category has been going up, especially within, I would say, the last 7 to 10 years. So the women numbers are really going up. Can we go to the next slide, please? So those are all different neighborhoods. I'm not gonna, go through each one of them, but you can take a look where all the projects reside. Down at the bottom, you see you have various locations. Those are typically the public works projects. So you might have a public works and sidewalks and streets that, the contract might contain projects that's, on different streets. So that's why they would be classified as various locations. Next slide, please. And so what you have here, these are the 70 public projects that were active that I spoke about earlier. And this is the breakdown by line department. The neighborhood development, again, that's the housing. Over 400,000 hours, 34% resident, 51% people of color, 6% female. Then you have parks, neighborhood parks, 24,000 hours, 37, 47, 6. The city buildings, public facilities, 174,000 hours, 19% resident, 41% people of color, 8% female. And then you have the public works, that's the streets, sidewalks, et cetera. 16,000 hours, 30% resident, 39% people of color, 8% female. All right, I think that's gonna be, so we're gonna move on to pipeline development.
Yeah, I can take it from here. Thank you, Chris. So the other important part of the BRJP office's work is pipeline development. That happens primarily through our jobs bank and our wonderful jobs bank coordinator, Janine McLaren. The purpose of the jobs bank is quite straightforward. It's to connect tradespeople who are available to perform work with opportunities on construction sites in the city of Boston. That's achieved through a variety of means, one of which is one-on-one consultation with the jobs bank coordinator herself. And then through in-community events, we had a construction opportunity fair recently that I wanted to just highlight on April 7th of this year. For this particular opportunity fair, we actually featured a contractor. So Dimeo Construction was on site. And again, the purpose of the event was to connect available tradespeople with opportunities on Dimeo construction projects. We held the event at Work 2 headquarters in Nubian Square. There were about 80 people in attendance with many partners in attendance as well. We can move to the next slide. Some of whom you can see here. So through both Janine's work one-on-one with laborers and through community events like this, the Jobs Bank seeks to facilitate connections between available workers and opportunities on construction projects. If we move forward one more slide, I wanted to call out that we've made some changes to the way that the Jobs Bank works recently, one of which is sort of approaching this in a way that we think will give us a little bit more reach. One of those is giving out QR codes for walk-on application sites so that folks who are showing up can actually scan the QR code and have their information added to the Jobs Bank that way, sort of more easily than it would be otherwise. So that's just a quick snapshot of the Jobs Bank. And if we move forward one slide, I think the last piece of the presentation is just a quick update from the Boston Employment Commission. But I, of course, will hand it over to Commissioner Burton, who can give sort of a more in-depth update. But I did want to mention, if we move forward one slide, that in November of 2021, the Boston Employment Commission adopted a sanctions policy. The sanctions policy doesn't create the enforcement mechanism of the Boston Employment Commission. Rather, it sort of lays out procedurally how sanctions or fines are levied. So it lays out the process whereby the Boston Employment Commission can receive a formal recommendation that a contractor be sanctioned for noncompliance. And then the process whereby the commission considers the merits of the recommendation and then determines the final amount of the fine pursuant to limits that are actually set in the ordinance itself in terms of the scale of the fine. So that policy was adopted last fall, as I mentioned, in November. And I just wanted to, mention that because I think our second biannual hearing of last year happened, I think, before this sanctions policy was adopted, although I think in that hearing we did offer an update about the upcoming vote on the sanctions policy. So I just wanted to follow up there. And I think that that's all of our slides. So I'm happy to hand it over to Commissioner Burton.
Yes, thank you, Andre. You overexceeded your time, but I'm gonna let you live on that one, okay?
Oh, okay.
Okay, go on ahead. Next up.
Thank you, Counselor, and Counselors. Thank you for inviting me today. My name is J.C. Burton. I am the chair of the Boston Employment Commission, and I make I want to say I appreciate you inviting me here to just give remarks, but I also know that I have a huge responsibility as the first woman to chair this commission, the first woman of color. I am looking forward to making sure that I can provide pathways and that we are doing anything within our power to put people of color and women on our construction sites, as well as our Boston residents. I too am a resident here of Boston. But we've already heard about the history of the Boston Jobs Residence Policy. We've heard about the numbers and the challenges that proceed, but I want to make sure that we're leaning into the larger goals that are in what we're supposed to be doing here for residents. Not only this policy started out as a policy for Black people, to make sure that they had a place and a space to work and to grow wealth and to also be able to provide for their families. That policy was expanded to include women. Then it was expanded to be redefined as people of color. Then it was also expanded to have just a nuance where there's a way that you can just comply by providing people that live in Boston, and they do not have to be women or people of color, but we cannot forget by which we first started. It is these underserved communities that are at the core of our human suffering here in Boston. And there are opportunities that our trade contractors, that our partners, that our subcontractors have, that our unions have to be able to make a difference here in the city. As you know, year after year, we miss the mark. And we miss the mark not necessarily because we are not trying, but we miss the mark because there's not necessarily an intentionality across the board with all of our partners that are required to do this work. I have 27 years of construction experience, much of which is outside of this marketplace. And what I do bring is a pathway of being able to look at things differently, being able to provide recommendations and strategies that will help to increase our numbers. As the Commonwealth starts to expand on additional goals that it has set forth to decarbonize the city, we too have to make sure that we are including people of color and women and our Boston residents in all of the strategies and projects that will be coming about in the Massachusetts 2050 decarbonization plan. The city has made some huge changes in its Office of Economic Development and Inclusion. And my role here as chair is to make sure that the data keeps moving in the right direction. We have spent time as a commission looking at the challenges specifically as to why we are not getting all of the numbers. And we know that is partly based upon the tone and tenor set by our contractors. It's by the tone and tenor and inclusion of opportunity by our trade partners in our unions. And lastly, it's by the general community. We need a seat. Not only do we need a seat, we have earned it. And it's our goal to make sure that we can have all comply with that. As we've heard earlier, that there's a chance to for the first time, to really look at sanctions and how to penalize companies that are not meeting the mark. The sanctions are administrative, in most part, administrative, as Andre alluded to earlier. And so we this year are embarking on a new opportunity to see how we can to apply sanctions to those that are missing, not only that are missing either the administrative marks or the compliance marks for workforce. At the same time that we're tightening our ropes on sanctions, we're seeing a little bit of a movement up front with contractors and our carpenters in our unions. We're seeing that contractors are taking us seriously, and they are now starting to develop their own pipeline of opportunities in creating what you heard a little bit from with Works 2, which is a kind of a construction resource center, is how they describe themselves, in a pathway to help provide support to smaller general contractors, primarily trade contractors of color that are working in the residential marketplace. There are also other organizations that are front that are trying to catalyze and help Black and brown construction companies scale. Largely, we're seeing a change because we are starting to track data. One of our more important partners, as you know, are the unions. And there's been a great example at the Carpenters Union, and under its leadership are tracking the women participation on project. There's an entire subset of program the Carpenters Union has just for women in construction. And we applaud both these efforts. These are efforts that we know will make a transformational change and that will change the tide of what we have here. And we don't need a tide to be changed tomorrow, but we need to make sure that the projects, in all projects, all contractors and subcontractors and our trade partners can start to make implementation, to start to catalyze their implementation for change today. Thank you.
Yes, JC, and you had 20 seconds to spare. So I'm gonna give those 20 seconds to somebody else. So thank you so much. Really do appreciate you being here in the space. I'm gonna kick it now over to Charlie. You now have the floor.
Thank you, and good morning. And I do appreciate the opportunity to come before you this morning. JC, thank you so much. And to all of our city councilors, we appreciate your efforts. Just to talk briefly about some of our challenges. First of all, let's make it perfectly clear that this is not union versus non-union. This is about who's playing fair and who's not, and about accountability for all. The Boston residency job policy is it's a wonderful component here in the city of Boston to hold people accountable, but the Boston residency numbers have fallen short. Are we where we used to be? Absolutely not. But we're definitely not where we want to be. And the part of the issue today that I see with the Boston residency numbers not being met and stalling out somewhere around 30 to 35% comes from workers being brought in from outside the city. That's why our minority numbers are being met, and our Boston residency numbers are low. And there's nothing against any other ethnic group ever, but African Americans are being excluded from these jobs and bringing in workers from outside the city. That's how I see it. That's what I'm looking at out on the job sites, et cetera. And we really need to be very intentional about talking about African Americans that live here in the city getting onto some of these jobs. Now, we're doing a much better job here in my organization, the North Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters and other trades. But this is not just about union tradespeople. This is about other jobs that are not being talked about in this city and these numbers not being met. The stalling out at the 30 to 35, maybe 37% Boston residents should definitely be coming up. The women numbers are great as they're climbing, but definitely not where we're hoping that they would be at this time, especially with the pipeline of women that we have available and the pipeline of workers as a whole within the unions. I know the contractors are saying that we don't have a pipeline of people. Carpenters Union, Local 327, we have over 200 on the bench, which brings us to most of those 200 on the bench are residents and minorities within the city of Boston. We've got to do better. These jobs down at the seaport need to be held better accountable for who works on these jobs. The Boston residents and minorities should not just be pushed into some of these jobs that are in the Roxbury, Dorchester area. We want to go down on the seaport as well. So we need to make changes in those areas. And the level of accountability needs to increase. Now, the fine and sanction process within the city of Boston seems like there are some glitches in there with legal and the fear of being sued if we start handing out fines and sanctions. I think we need to take a better look at rewriting this whole ordinance and holding another level of accountability all the way around. I can say more, but I know my time is limited. I'd love to be involved in any conversations that are being had. That is my testimony. Thank you, Ruth C., for making sure that I was a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Charlie.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Charlie, I'm gonna now move over to my council colleagues for questions. I'm gonna start off with the lead sponsor, Councilor Louis Jean. You now have the floor, and I'm going to set the timer for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Before you do that, Councilor Mejia, I just want to make sure, is Priscilla Flint Banks, is she not on? She's also a Boston Employment Commission member, was also set to testify. So just want to make sure we give her the floor if she's here.
I don't see her. Oh, wait, yeah, she's here in the, okay. She wasn't on my list on the thing. We just promoted her. Okay. Priscilla, good to see you. As always, you now have the floor.
I'm sorry, are you talking to me?
Yes, my love.
Okay, good morning. First of all, I am no longer a commissioner, so yeah, I'm no longer a commissioner at this time. But thank you. Good morning, city councilors. I want to thank you for having this hearing, and I want to thank you, Councilor Rootsey, for inviting me to testify today. My name is Priscilla Flint Banks. I am the president and CEO of Flint and Associates, co-founder of the Black Economic Justice Institute, BG, BECMA, the Black Boston COVID-19 Coalition, Blue Hill Carter Planning Commission, the Marcus Anthony Hall Educational Institute. I'm a licensed minister, a broadcaster at Boston Praise Radio and TV, and a published author. I am a retired employee of the city of Boston. I ran the payroll and general service department for almost 20 years and retired in 2010 after being discriminated by my supervisor. I'm here today to testify about the non-compliance of the BLJP. As members of the Boston Jobs Coalition, we work with the late Chuck Turner to strengthen the BLJP so it could be enforced. We work with the former administration, and creating the good job standards, the new BRJP ordinance, and this biannual meeting. I am very disappointed with the non-compliance of this ordinance that has been on the books since 1983. For you new city councilors who may not know me or the work I have done, I have been an advocate and activist for a long time, trying to make sure Boston residents, people of color, and females are on these projects. I'm sorry, I just lost my place. I'm sorry. With all the construction that is going on in this city, there's no reason why these developers and contractors are not in compliance. I led many protests in Boston, attended many Beck meetings for years before I was appointed to the commission by former Mayor Kim Janey. I do not believe that the ordinance cannot be enforced. Where there is a will, there's a way. The unions play a part in this problem as well. The unions will not come forward to let us know how many people of color, Boston residents, and females they have. Yet we don't see many people who look like me in the unions. The unions don't seem to be held accountable, don't seem to be able to be held accountable. That's sad because it appears the unions control most of the construction projects that go on in Boston. We wonder why Black people's wealth are worth $8 and white people are worth $247,500. We're not getting our fair share of the construction jobs or procurement dollars. This ordinance needs to be enforced. How do we enforce it? I believe the administration, city councilors, the law department, the BEC, the BRJP, and community members should have some working groups to figure this out. It makes no sense to continue to have a commission that does not have any power. A few months ago, the BEC voted on applying sanctions, but I'm not sure if any sanctions have been applied because I resigned in December. Because the BEC really does not have any power, it is frustrating to attend meetings every month and continue to hear the same old sorry excuses from the developers and the contractors. When Mayor Wu ran for office, she promised she would enforce the BRJP ordinance. We, the voters of Boston, expect this to happen because we believe in Mayor Wu. I have been part of monitoring committees in Roxbury for the past 12 years. And many days I sat in monitoring meetings and watched and listened to developers and contracts come up with excuse after excuse why they were not in compliance. They continue to get away with this, and we watch as executive directors and owners of projects lied in their RFPs just to get community support. And yet there were no consequences for their lives. I am happy to see this new group of city councilors, and I am praying that real change will come. I thank you all, and I appreciate you all. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Priscilla. It's always great to see you. Always bringing that fire, keeping us accountable. Love it. I'm gonna now move over to Councilor Louise Jen for questions. I'm going to ask my colleagues to keep their questions to 5 minutes. And I'm going to set the timer now.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who has come, who came, responded to our emails. I want to thank the administration for being here and really setting the tone. It sounds like I just want to shout out in Chris Brown's presentation really is showing how some of the numbers have improved, but that there's still a long way to go. I guess my first question would be, Andre, you outlined that the 7 compliance targets are what the fines are tied to, right? The fines aren't tied to whether you have 41% people of color, 50% Boston residency, 12% woman, but we haven't been fining anyone. My question is whether the 7 targets, the 7 compliance targets, whether they're too easy. If developers and contractors have been meeting them and we haven't fined anyone, should we be doing something surrounding those compliance targets to make, or should we tie them closer to the targets if we want to be able to find people?
I think that, you know, insofar as these 7 compliance targets are for the most part purely administrative, I do think that there could be compliance targets that hew closer to the intent of the ordinance. Exactly what those would look like to ensure that the enforcement of the sanctions is legal and possible and defensible. I can't say right now what those would be, but I would agree that these compliance targets are, I don't know if easy is the right word, but they are certainly within reach, given that they are administrative in nature, almost entirely administrative and attendance based. Some of them are for attending pre-construction meetings, BEC hearings, so on and so forth. So yes, I would agree.
And administrative in nature, and oftentimes that tends to disadvantage smaller contractors and developers who also tend to be Black and brown. So like we want to be careful about that, right?
Yes.
And the legality, I do understand the concern there regarding the legality of the targets, but I think that we can do a better job of data collection to be able to show that we need to have the fines targeted closer to the goals of the ordinance. But even with that, even with the administrative fines that are permissible under the ordinance, we're not finding people who aren't even complying with the administrative goals. So can you explain why we haven't been finding folks? And then even after the enactment of the sanctions policy, have we found anyone since then? And I did see your answers, and the answers are no, we haven't found anyone prior, and we haven't found anyone since. But my question is why? Why not?
I think there are a few reasons, and I'll start, and I can pass this over to Chris if he has anything to add. I mean, I think one reason is because the procedural elements of the sanctions policy, which lay out sort of what needs to happen between the point at which a subcontractor is in a state of non-compliance, whether that's for missing a pre-construction meeting or for not submitting weekly payroll. The process from getting from there to an actual determination of a fine and its amount by the commission is a fairly new set of procedures. I think it takes time for a commission or a body like this to exercise those new muscles to a certain extent. And again, it does require that a construction monitor bring a recommendation of sanction to the Boston Employment Commission. I will say that there were several recommendations made at the end of last year, just as the sanctions policy was adopted, for instances of noncompliance that occurred in the summer of 2021, and we determined that because the sanctioning power can't apply retroactively, that we wouldn't sanction, or the commission determined that they wouldn't sanction for that particular offense. But I do think that we are at a point now where should a monitor bring forward a recommendation for a sanction, that we would be in a position to move forward. Potentially slowly, because again, it's the first time we've exercised this power, but I do think we are in a position to do that. Another sort of tension with sanctions that I want to bring up is that the policy, the ordinance is a little bit interesting in that the sort of instances of non-compliance will occur at the level of a subcontractor for the most part. So for example, if a subcontractor fails to submit their weekly payroll, that constitutes an instance of non-compliance, although the fine that the commission ultimately votes on moving forward with or not will apply to the prime contractor as opposed to the subcontractor. However, one of those 7 compliance efforts is attending corrective action meetings. So there is an incentive, particularly for smaller subcontractors whose non-compliance is potentially not so much a factor of their being not committed to meeting the goals of the ordinance, but rather a lack of capacity potentially. Maybe they're a smaller contractor that doesn't have back office staff, and so they're consistently missing weekly payroll submissions. There is, an incentive, and part of the role of a construction monitor is to try and assist that subcontractor in becoming compliant. So there is a little bit of a tension there, which is that where possible, we do want to help particularly smaller subcontractors be compliant as opposed to non-compliant before we move forward to a point where we are sanctioning or fining. So that does represent a little bit of a tension. Like I think, the spirit of the the sanctions policy and the compliance measures is that like where we can bring a subcontractor into a state of compliance, we'll push to do so. And that's one of the reasons we have construction monitors. I don't know if that fully answered your question, Councilor Louis-Jean, but I'm also happy to pass it over to Christopher to provide anything that I missed.
Andre, thank you for co-hosting and co-facilitating alongside me. But I just wanted to just note that our time is up for the 5 minutes. And
oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I'll ask more questions on the second round.
Yeah, we're gonna have a series of other questions. So, but I will, in the sake of just kind of, Chris, if there's anything that you want to just chime in so that we can wrap up this particular section, then by all means, do so.
Well, absolutely. I agree, Andre. I think we're in a position that we can find, and myself as the manager and the BRJP staff, we're ready to submit fines. We do have contractors that other projects that have been non-compliant with those 7 efforts. We're ready to bring those projects forth. There is a legality part of it. And one of the things that we did see in the past is a lot of the contractors and workers that this ordinance was put together to support. When we did look at potential fine, the fines of contractors, a lot of those ended up being Black and brown companies. And one of the reasons is because when you have these larger companies, they have back office staff. You look at the Turners and JMAs, the Suffolks, they have back office staff. They can come to the meetings. They can keep up with the paperwork. The man with the truck, he's out on the job site. So, the paperwork part, it might be a challenge to them. But we're ready to bring the majority companies, the non-majority companies. We get it. We've heard it from the community. We know that the fines, the community wants the fines to take place. We're ready to bring those projects forth and proceed with the fining process.
Thank you, Chris. JC, and just I saw your hand up, so wanted to just, Councilor Louis is one of the lead sponsors, so more than happy to give you an opportunity to answer her question, and then we're going to move on to Councilor Worrell.
I just wanted to add one more. Thank you, Councilor. I appreciate it. I just want to add one more component, which is what Mr. Brown was saying, is that sometimes we have found that the Black and brown companies are under-resourced. And so in administering sanctions, we want to be certain that we are not penalizing those that had less resources to do the work that's needed. And documentation should not necessarily be the only pathway. The important documentation is the notion that the resident is verifying payroll. So we can verify the wages that are being paid, and then also verify the physical location by which people live. So those are the 2 components that we're still trying to make sure that we're working through. We did have a whole host of firms that we wanted to, or subcontractors we wanted to make sure that we could find, and that would happen the way that Andre described it. The subcontractors are the ones that are at fault, the ones that are implying the workforce, but the contractors are the ones that have the financial instrument and the relationship with the city that would hold the fine. So we are certainly planning on moving forward and looking forward to being sure that we can provide both the carrot and the stick. And the stick is one that we think that we'll be changing both hearts and minds around inclusion on construction projects.
Thank you, JC, for that. I'm going to now move on to Councilor Worrell. You have the floor and 5 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Lima, can you tell me if there's data around, because as I mentioned before, it's one thing getting them on the site, but it's also the other thing to make sure that we're being paid the same on these sites. Is there any data around wages? On your graph, you showed hours worked. Do you have any information on how much people of color have been getting paid, how much women have been getting paid on those projects?
Right.
Go ahead, Chris.
Right. So some of our projects are what we call prevailing wage projects. So we do track wages, and that I would say that's probably 20% of the projects. They send in the dollar amount that workers are being paid. But like the larger projects, like the projects like the profit projects, we don't track the wages of those workers. They're not required to submit the dollar amount that the workers are being paid.
All right. Is that something that you think we can, collect, or because I would like to make sure that wages are equitable across the board for each group.
Right. So that's something I would have to check with. That would be a larger data request that I would have to check with the IT department to see whether they can, pull those numbers together and get back to you. But I see the IT
I
department.
see that Priscilla hand is up. Do you mind? Do you want her to? Is it okay for her to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so there has been problems with wages. I remember when Tropical Foods was built, and Tropical Foods and Madison Park CDC put in their RFP that they were going to pay workers $50 an hour, construction workers, and they wind up paying them $11 to $15, and that's why we came up with the good job standards, and we had to fight for it, and it just does not, these laws, this ordinance, it just doesn't make, to me, the paperwork. I don't care about the paperwork. We need our people working on these jobs, and there is construction everywhere in this city, but our people are not working, and it's disgraceful. And the wages, they say one thing in the proposal, and then they do something totally different. So, I mean, if they're paying people, construction workers, $11 an hour, while the union people are getting $50 and $60 an hour, that's a problem. They paid the people that were building the parking lot $60 an hour because it was union. And so the whole thing needs to be looked at and restructured and do something different. Thank you. I'm sorry, I get emotions, man.
No, don't ever
My
apologize.
pet peeve.
Go ahead, Councilor Rao.
I see Mr. Cofield has his hand raised as well. I don't know if you wanted to answer the
Go
question.
ahead, Charles. Thank you for that.
Yes, absolutely. So the the unions are always being held accountable for wages. We have set wages, and the other construction that's going on in the city is just completely and totally overlooked as far as being held accountable for consistent pay rates. We have records here with our research team that can show the inconsistency with wages on a lot of the non-union sites. And when I first started my comments, that this is not about union, non-union, it's about who's playing fair and who's not. The underground economy in this city is out of control. Nobody wants to take a look at it. The city of Boston has jobs going on in this city with the city of Boston signs on the lawn where they have no Boston residents, where people are being exploited, payroll fraud, tax fraud. There are a number of things going on here that are totally being overlooked. And the unions are low-hanging fruit, so you beat up on us all the time instead of looking at some of the more serious problems where people haven't been paid for weeks.
Thank you. Councilor Barra, I just want to let you know, if you want to ask one more question, you're more than welcome to do so. And I also just want to acknowledge that we've also been joined by my colleague, Councilor Flaherty. When it's your turn, we will have an opportunity for remarks and your questions.
All right, so this will be my last question, and I would love to hear what Ms. Williams-Mitchell has to say as well. But I love the idea of the jobs bank. Is there any way that we could, get those QR codes and also the Boston resident job policy on those, every time you pass by a site, there's a building permit that has, it's like, it's a large building permit that everyone's looking at. Is it possible to put the QR code for the Boston job resident policy or the job bank on those permits, and also what the job resident policy is? So our residents and community knows, what we should be looking out for, and also get connected.
Absolutely, I think that's certainly possible. I can say that the intent of the QR code is to do exactly that, right? To have these, them posted at job sites so that they are easily accessible. So, but your point, Councilor Royal, about an explanation as to what the jobs bank is and what the Boston Residents Jobs Policy is, in addition to that, is well taken. So I can certainly talk with our team, Janine McLaren, our jobs bank coordinator, about including that in sort of like the standard post on a job site.
And is anyone else, like, do we share the jobs bank list, you know, the list of people who are looking for jobs with any other organizations or group? Like, is it, do we share with Mass Hire, any outside organizations that could connect them with jobs?
Yes, yes. I'm happy to follow up with like the complete list of sort of the outreach network that Janine uses for the jobs bank. I won't be able to list them off the top of my head right now, but I'm happy to follow up with that information.
Okay.
Awesome. And Madam Chair, can we listen? I see Ms. Williams-Mitchell has her hands raised.
Yeah, just one quick second, Councilor Burrell. Just so you know that Angela is part of the second panel, but
Okay.
Angela, you have something that's specific to the conversation that we're having right now. Before you have your welcome remarks, go ahead and answer specifically the question that that we're talking about here. You're on mute, my love.
Thank you very much, Councilor Worrell. To Mr. Brown, my question is, can you share why the wages on some projects are tracked and others are not? Because to Mr. Cofield's point, that is huge. We are not here to beat up on the unions, but we are here to find out what loopholes, what weak links need to be tightened. So can you expound on why, as well as how can that be improved and what resources you would need to make that happen?
Absolutely. So in terms of enforcement of wages by the BRJP office, we only have power to enforce wages on prevailing wage jobs. So what makes a project a prevailing wage project is all based off the funding, and it would be federal funding. So when a project receives federal funding, and you know, it all depends on the type of funding and also the size of the building, so forth and so on, that kicks in the wage rate on a project. Those are the only projects that we have, the BRJP office has enforcement powers over in terms of looking at individual workers' wages. Now, if we have a worker that's working on a project and they're receiving $9 an hour and we're not, we don't have that enforcement power, we would direct them to the Department of Labor if the worker is not being paid at all or if they're being underpaid. And that underpayment would be based off of whatever the state requirement is for the minimum wage that they're to be to receive.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Angela, I just wanted to just be super mindful of kind of like the time and also the process. So I'm gonna, Councilor Worrell, I'm gonna continue with with our colleagues for questions. And then Angela, we cannot wait to get to the second panel because I know you're gonna bring in the heat. So let's go to Councilor Tanya Fernandez-Anderson. You now have the floor in 5 minutes.
No.
Councilor Fernandez-Anderson. You're on mute if you are here. Okay, we'll come back to Councilor Fernandez-Anderson. In the order of the right
here, you just unmuted.
Oh, you did, okay, great. Okay, Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, you now have the floor. Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, you're back on mute. Okay, so Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, what I'll do is I'm going to go next to Councilor Lara, and hopefully we can get your, oh, I think you're back on. Go ahead,
I'm
Councilor.
sorry, I was having issues with my mic and going back and forth, sorry. So I think one of the issues, and again, I appreciate the community members. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, sorry. I appreciate the community members who have been over this back and forth, looking at the metrics that is used to sort of figure out, how many people of color, how many Black, how many women. And we all agree that those, whatever metrics you're using is not very user-friendly. And so it's very hard to read, it's very hard to track. And we want to work with you to figure that out in a way that it's more legible, in a way that you're not, like these job sites are not filtering people over and over and over and basically hiring. And what they do is they lay off the same group of people and then seasonally bring back the same people in order to meet the quota. And so there's a pattern, and then we've looked at it, and it's very clear that this systemic racist method that is being used does not work, right? It's actually, it's not equitable and it's not working. We can say all the pretty words about, what the intentions are, but the reality is the BRJP oversight in Roxbury has been looking at this data and following it, and we are completely dissatisfied with, again, the metric that you're using, or at least the format of the chart. And we want to redo that so that it's more legible, and that in creating transparency, that you are posting it or updating folks on a regular basis, as opposed to us waiting for a meeting until we go after the information. And I think those are sort of my concerns in terms of, reporting the stuff out. And of course, obviously, to my colleagues' points, your efforts to reaching out and finding people of color or women to work in this business, your outreach obviously needs more effort. And I'd like to also shout out Mr. Cofield for being here, and the work that you guys do, the Black men and women in the Carpenters Union, who have been putting in a lot of efforts in ensuring or increasing Black and brown people in this industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Anderson-Fernandez. Fernandez-Anderson. I'm just curious if anyone wants to respond to any of the comments that the councilor has made.
I would just like to say that I would welcome an opportunity to work with your office, Councilor, to determine sort of how we can structure the reporting and metrics that we're producing as a part of the BRJP monitoring effort in a way that's more accessible. As someone who spent a lot of time in the Department of Innovation and Technology working on making the website more accessible, I know that the way that we present data, the way that we present information to the public is really important and can mean the difference between something that's not understandable to the general public and something that's really accessible and helps folks sort of intuitively understand what they're looking at. So I would welcome the opportunity to sort of pick that apart a little bit more, understand sort of what areas we could be improving on. And yeah, I just wanted to respond saying that.
Thank you. I look forward to that. We can have our team contact you, and we can get together with the Roxbury team as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, do you have any other questions that you want to bring, or comments, or does anyone else want to react, comment, share? You still have 1 minute and 7 seconds, so I just want to make sure you use your time.
I don't know if I missed this, but is there, what are you working on now to go beyond, or how are you investing in capital, in funds to create efforts to reach the quota that you claim that is so difficult to reach?
And then after someone answers, I know that Charles, you got your hand up, so wanted to give you the floor, see if you wanted to respond to that question and or the one, or make a comment from the previous one. But go ahead, Charles, you have the floor.
Yes, just to comment on previous statements. First of all, I want to thank everyone for actually acknowledging the fact that the Carpenters Union have made great efforts to make sure that we are increasing our numbers as well as the other trades. We have Ms. Dozer on the line here as well from the electricians, and there are so many others that are really striving to make sure that we change the culture of construction with union trades within the industry. Are we, like I said before, are we where we want to be? Absolutely not. But, you know, just like Councilor Anderson spoke of, the systemic racism that has occurred in the Boston area and Commonwealth of Massachusetts and all over the country has got to improve. I mean, as far along as we are, we have such a ways to go. I'm supposed to be off this call, but this conversation is so important and near and dear to my heart. I get worked up when we start talking about this, because I have this passion, and everyone on this call, I'm sure, has the passion to do this work, and we want to see better results, regardless of who we have to hold accountable and need to hold accountable. I am on a team of people here in the Council of Carpenters here on Dorchester Avenue, where we actually have a diversity plan here within our council, and people on our board that are making sure that we're committed to this work. So please hold us accountable. Please call us and tell us what we need to do to help in the industry as well as the Carpenters Union.
Yeah. Thank you, Charles. And you know, we so much appreciate your passion and your dedication to this work, and the time that you took to be here with us today. The good thing is this is being recorded so that you can go back and listen at your leisure, and also follow up with our office if you have any other follow-up questions, and making sure that you're in deep community and conversation with the lead sponsors as well, and other things that we can do. I know that we do this, twice a year. I think that as we continue to have these conversations, what I'm realizing is that we have a lot of really great ideas and ordinances in places, but what we have a problem with is our execution and implementation plan and accountability to that work. And I think that that's where the opportunity really lies as we continue to move forward with this conversation. It's the accountability factor where I think, and the implementation, that we often get sidetracked.
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you so much. And I think we need more than 2 meetings a year, because this is a big problem, no doubt.
That's right. That's why I was
we need more input from everybody. That's why we need more meetings.
That's right. 2 times a year is not enough, and that's why the maintenance that happens in between is going to be key to the success of this effort. So I am going to thank you for being here with us today, and I am going next to my colleague, Councilor Lara from District 6, for opening remarks and your questions, my love. You now have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair, and a big thanks to the makers for sponsoring and calling this hearing. I don't want to be repetitive in terms of everything that's already been said. The Boston Residents Job Policy is a transformative policy, and with all of the changes and all of the updates and all of the tweaks that we need to make it better, it's a sound policy, but it's only a sound policy if, one, it works, and if we have an enforcement mechanism. And what we've heard from people over and over again for years is that we don't have a strong enforcement mechanism when it comes to the Boston Resident Jobs Policy. I don't know if this has changed, but we just couldn't find any evidence that the city has ever issued any formal sanction. And this ordinance is nearly 40 years old. And I think that a big reason about why we've been unable to sanction folks is because we can't ultimately legally prove that there is a pool of workers available, one, that we're not using, or that people from out of town are, taking the jobs of people who work here. So we don't know how many local construction workers, people of color, or women we have available to join the job sites. Unions are not required to collect and report racial and gender data on their members. That doesn't mean that some unions don't, but it's not a requirement. And not all construction workers are union members anyways. So we ultimately don't have a baseline to measure against. We have our stories, like our people see. We walk around the construction sites and we see what's happening, but that's not enough. That's enough for the city to know that there's a problem, but it's not enough to actually enforce it. And so we need to start collecting baseline data on the total number of residents, people of color, and women in the city who are available. And so my take on the issue is that it's very clear. We have been, maybe considering some kind of construction worker registration in the city of Boston, where people can, come in and register, and we have this data and this information available. And I guess that's one of my questions. My questions are around recommendations and the viability of the recommendations, right? So one, can we get people who are construction workers, union or otherwise, that once they get certified to be workers and they live in the city of Boston, that they register, and that we have a database in the city of Boston that tells us how many people we have. So when we see that there are contractors and construction workers who are not working in compliance, we can say, hey, you're saying that there are not people in the city who can fill these jobs, and there are, and we have the proof that there are, and we can sanction them because we know we can tell legally, at least we can tell the story of why these folks are not complying with our city's ordinance. Are we asking construction companies who are working in Boston to provide baseline data about the people who they have employed as their core crews, right? Do we have the demographic data for the core crews in the city of Boston? Can we do that? And also, when we talk about what a responsible, right, in our definition of what a responsible construction company or whatever responsible contractor is, I think that we need to start looking at including the history of the BRJP compliance as a part of defining them as responsible contractors, because if that's going to make a dent ultimately in whether or not they're considered to be responsible contractors, then we're going to see much more compliance with folks there. And so I say all of that to say that, I have a lot of questions in terms of data that we want around total work hours in the city, BEC, and your ability to hold the owners and general contractors accountable when they're not in compliance, number of work hours for minority and women-owned companies that have worked on these projects in the past, and looking at work hours to be broken down by union versus non-union jobs. We talked about the contracts and how people will say that they're going to pay people $60 an hour and then they'll skirt and not do it. It's very, very obvious that unions protect our workers. And every construction worker in the city of Boston is not going to be a union worker. And we need to protect our workers anyways, whether they're in a union or whether they're not in a union. So those are my questions ultimately about like these recommendations. What is the viability of implementing those kind of programs, whether it be registering our workers, our construction workers in the city who live in the city of Boston, so that we have that baseline, asking for baseline information about core crews, and changing the definition of what we consider a responsible contractor or a construction company to include BRJP compliance in that definition.
Excellent questions. I'm wondering who wants to take a stab. I see, Andre, you got off mute, so go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at answering some, and then I can hand it over to Chris if he has something to add. I will say that I agree, Councillor, that baseline number, sort of the denominator, is incredibly important. That availability metric is something that we don't have a sense of right now. Not just the total available pool of construction workers in Boston, but I think to achieve the end that we want to achieve, it would really be in a much larger geographic area, because we know that there are non-Boston residents working on projects in the city of Boston. So to understand, of the pool of workers that are working on projects, how many of them are from Boston, where do they live? Essentially, a construction worker census is sort of the first step towards a disparity study for construction in the city of Boston, which I think would be a very powerful tool, depending on what we would find as in terms of the utilization as it compares to availability of workers that fall into those categories: Boston residents, people of color, and women. I think to conduct a disparity study like that, we would need obviously disclosure from unions to make sure that the picture of the availability is representative of all the workers that are working in the city of Boston, whether they're union or non-union. But I do think that the idea of a disparity study, or at least sort of doing a little bit more to dig into the availability of workers of different types in the city of Boston, is something that we are discussing currently. So I did want to mention that. I can pass it over to Chris to answer any of the other questions, although I'm not sure how many of them I just answered, but or responded to.
Well, I just have a couple of comments. In terms of the registration process, I think that's a good idea. I'm not sure how that would work. I think we'll probably have to do some research to see whether we could, implement a type of registration type of program for workers. But one comment I would like to say is that not all projects that the public sees in Boston are subject to the Boston Residents Jobs Policy. Some construction projects are not subject to the Boston Residents Jobs Policy, and these are the reasons why. In order for a project to be subject to BRJP, it has to either be over 50,000 square feet, or the project has to receive some funds from the city, right?
Chris,
So
does that include, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, is in terms of the ones that have to be compliant with the Boston Residents Job Policy, is it only the 50,000, or whether or not they receive funding, or does it include folks that receive variances, zoning variances as well?
Yeah, so it's my understanding that it's 50,000 or 50,000 square feet or above, or the project has to, receive some type of city funding. That's what makes it subject to BRJP. So you might have a project that's privately funded, it's not over 50,000 square feet, that you see in Boston, and is not subject to these BRJP.
Yeah, and Councilor Lott, I just wanted to let you know that we are over time, but I see that Priscilla has her hand up, and in the spirit of just making sure that we create space for people to speak here, I'm gonna have Priscilla, just if you could just share, and then I'm gonna move on to Councilor Flynn.
I just want to say real quickly, I like that idea of registering as well. And I would think that maybe the job banks, that might be a place where it could sit, because Janine is already gathering Boston residents and people who are looking for work. So that might be, I'm not trying to put no more work on her, but that might be a place where that registration could be, So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you for that. And I think that these hearings really give us an opportunity, and I really do appreciate Councilor Lotta's ideas and some of the things that we've heard so far from our colleagues, because the goal is to work in partnership and recognize that we're all trying to get to the same place. And if we could do so collectively, then I think that that's what it all hands on deck is all about. So really do appreciate the spirit and the energy that is here today. And I'm going to move on to Councilor Flynn from District 2. Our council president, for questions and any remarks, and then followed by Councilor at Large Flaherty. And then we'll move on to our second panel.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia, and thank you to the sponsors, Councilor Worrell, Councilor Lujan, and Councilor Fernandez-Anderson as well, for the important work you're doing, as well as you, Madam Chair. Want to say thank you to the activists and the neighborhood leaders that have been involved in this issue for many years, going back to 82, 81, when it was enacted in 83, actually. Then in 86, it was strengthened under Mayor Flynn to establish the Boston Employment Commission, and then it was further extended by Mayor Walsh in 2017, revising it to increase the standards. But I just wanted to highlight the important work that's going on. This biannual review is critical, because if we don't have the numbers in place and we don't know exactly what's happening, we need to make sure we have a good data. But the laws are in place. you know, I think we just don't do a good job of enforcing those laws. And how do we make sure that companies across Greater Boston are abiding by this city policy? So I think there's a lot of work we have left. I know Mr. Cofield from the Carpenters Union and in the 103 is doing great work. I also know that the building trades are making great progress as well. But what's important is that we all continue to work together and try to make sure that those living in Boston and communities of color and women have equal access and fair access, equity to these important jobs in the job training programs as well. So I just want to say thank you to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Just curious if any of our panelists want to reflect, respond.
I would just say that we are certainly trying to sort of solve the enforcement puzzle actively. We've talked a little bit about it on this call several times about what that entails, but we understand that there is a discrepancy between sort of the compliance measures on the administrative side and what the ordinance is intended to achieve, which is, equity in the construction industry in terms of jobs for Boston residents, people of color, and women. So, that is something that we are discussing actively about how to close that sort of disjuncture. So I appreciate President Flynn your comments.
Thank you. Thank you. And I also just want to acknowledge that we are also have been joined. He's not a city councilor, but he's definitely in the trades, the building trades. The head of it is Brian Doherty. He's also here with us. So thank you for being here with us this morning. Unless Councilor Flynn, you don't have any other questions or comments, I can move on to Councilor Flaherty, if that's okay with you.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you, Councilor Mejia.
Thank you. Okay, Councilor Flaherty, you now have the floor.
Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. Thank our friends in labor for being here. Obviously, Andre, Chris, and JC, and always good to be in the presence of Priscilla. Of course, she's been on this since day one, as have, and just to be fair, the great work of Bruce Bowling, former Mayor Ray Flynn, and my former colleagues, Chuck Turner, Mike Ross, and Ayanna Presley have done a lot of work in the space to try to move the dial. I'm on record a long time ago feeling that I believe there's a compelling state interest in someone having a good paying job, good wages, good health benefits, and good retirement benefits and opportunities. And so I always feel, and I've said from day one, we should be pushing the envelope on this and get back to court and make our case that this should be considered a compelling state interest to allow folks to lift themselves up, to be in a position for home ownership, and to eliminate those gaps, particularly around food insecurity. And so I'll continue to bang the drum that we should continue to push the envelope on this and get to a position where it gets challenged and we succeed in declaring this a compelling state interest. That said, the areas I'd like to touch on in this space is our friends in labor. Obviously, I would love to see them share their census data with us so that we can actually be targeted with our outreach and our recruitment, and to help grow those opportunities within the various trades and unions. Some are obviously doing a better job than others, and we've recognized that in this hearing. And I think that by having the census, we can identify, who needs to sort of do more work and how we can be helpful as district and at-large councilors, connecting them to and introducing them to residents in our neighborhoods and in our city that may want that opportunity and help close those gaps within the respective unions. Two, I would like to lift up the city's program, the City Academy, and I'm biased as a former Teamster. There are lots of Teamster jobs available today. However, those Teamster jobs require CDL and a hoisting license, and the City Academy helps folks get CDL and hoisting licenses along with EMS training. So I want to make sure that folks know on this at this hearing that there's tremendous opportunity that currently exists. And again, Teamster jobs are good paying jobs with good wages and good benefits, both on the health side and the retirement side. and oftentimes gets overlooked. The focus as it pertains to the Boston residency job policy seems to be on our trades, but there are other participating unions, particularly Local 25, where what I'm most familiar with, of course, and I'm happy to make those introductions. And obviously, lastly, when I was chair of the ARPA funds, I want to make sure that any funds that are coming in, that we're complying with the Boston residency job policy and making sure that we track the bad actors and hold them accountable. And we've seen it. I call it the LLC shuffle and hustle, where you'll have a company come in and they get called out, or something happens, or they're not compliant, and 6 months or a year later, same principles and same parties behind the company, but it just has a new name and a new hashtag and a new LLC attached to it. So identifying, again, the bad actors and who's playing fast and cute with being held accountable, I think that we need to keep a watchful eye on it. So this hearing obviously has been very helpful. I do concur with Mr. Cofield, probably should do it more than twice a year. But again, we've got tremendous partnerships in our city, and our friends in labor are a key piece of this. And it's folks like the labor leaders that are on this call, as well as our residents, folks like Priscilla Flint Banks, that continue to keep our feet to the fire. So look forward to working with all of you. Look forward to working with our chair in identifying ways, again, to create more opportunities within all of the trades and all of the unions, holding bad actors accountable, and making sure that any precious funds, whether it's ARPA or any funds that come down the pike that we're using to put people to work, that we do so and we comply with the spirit and the intent of this. And finally, I think it should be pushed to a compelling state interest, because I firmly believe in it, and I know everybody on this Zoom does as well. So, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Councilor Flaherty, and yes, we are. I think this is one of the reasons why we love being in these spaces, because lots of great ideas come of it. The question now is, how do we coordinate to make sure that we bring those ideas to life? And nobody does that work better than the advocates who have been living these realities. And so we're going to move on to our second panel. Just want to thank my colleagues.
Madam Chair, I was wondering, I have additional questions for the administration, and since they're
for the administration for round two.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
We usually do a second round, so I have a few more questions, two more questions I'd like to ask the administration.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Councilor Louisiane. You have the floor.
Great. I want to thank everyone again. I think this has been a really fruitful conversation, again, to figure out how we can bring more people into the fold to share in the city's prosperity. I have two questions. Mr. Charlie Cofield brought up a really great point, and I think when I spoke to administration previously, when it comes to the people of color data, do we actually have that broken down, disaggregated by Black, Latinx? Do we have that data?
We do. And again, that would be something that I would have to reach out to the IT department. So when payrolls are sent to us, they identify whether a person's Hispanic, person's Black, Cape Verdean, Caucasian, so forth and so on. I would check with IT to see, whether I can.
Cape Verdean is Black.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. So, but with us, it is broken down into separate categories.
Great, thank you. So consider this a formal request for us to get that data. I think that would be really, really helpful, because I think Mr. Cofield's comment was really, just want to make sure that we get that data so that we know where the work is that we got to do, right? Because if we see the people of color numbers are maybe increasing, but we also want to make sure that we are living up to the spirit of the fight that Chuck Turner and the Boston Jobs Coalition initially fought. So if we could have that disaggregated data, would love that. So that, again, consider that a formal request. The second question I have is, I think JC had mentioned a work to a job. There was like a job pop-up at work too, and we've been to multiple job pop-ups. I see a lot of the great folks on this call often at those pop-ups, or where a contractor developer is has a job fair, and I think those are great. I was thinking, what have we learned from those pop-ups? And I think this is a question later also for the advocates, to more systematize job recruitment, to make it more formal, to be more present in community? Does that mean maybe having like a pilot spot for the city or in partnership with unions or whoever in Nubian Square or in the heart of our city, so that we have recruitment that is consistent, either into our unions or for these projects or both? Like, what does that look like? We've done these, we've been to a number of job fairs. We've been in partnership with a lot of different folks. What would it look like to pilot an establishment or to have one long-term?
Right, so what I've seen with the job fair, the opportunity fairs is you do have individuals coming in looking for work, but because there's a lot of construction now, a lot of individuals with, if you have a license, a lot of skilled workers, they're already working. For the most part, when people are walking into these opportunity fairs, they might be working a different career and they're interested in becoming a construction worker, but they don't have any experience. So, but the opportunity fairs they're good because it exposes people, workers, people to different trade. But I think something that I mentioned before, and I mentioned it this time since I have the floor, is that personally, I think Boston needs to build a vocational school. That's what I'm seeing. People are not calling us looking for work. We're not getting emails. We're not getting people calling Chris Brown or Janine Claren who has experience. And for that fact, we're not even getting non-experienced laborers checking in with us nowadays. So I think if you have skills and a lot of people that are interested in construction, know about construction, they're working. I think the void is training. If you want to be an accountant, you have to go to school to get a license to be an accountant. Same as construction. You're not going to walk on a construction site and be an electrician without having a license. So I'm a big advocate of the city investing in a vocational school, and it could be, I don't want to get into the funding aspect, but I think the programs that we have now, they're good, but I don't think they're enough. And I think we need to build a vocational school and market it, and and put hundreds of individuals through those type of programs. At least they can get a certificate, right? You go through the program. It's a year program. You get a certificate. You show up one time. You get the basics about being an electrical worker, and then you have an electrical company saying, okay, cool, this person right here, at least they have the basis. They showed up one time. I'm willing to train this person further. So I'm a big advocate of the city investing in vocational school.
Thank you. Councilor Louis-Jean, you good? Because I see Charles's hand up and Priscilla. So I'm just going to give them both an opportunity to answer. And then I'm going to ask my colleagues who are interested in asking a second round of questions to raise their hand so that we can afford you the opportunity to do so.
Charles? Yeah, I just have a real quick comment to make about the, about training. So if we have, and this has to go to a plug for union for trades, okay? We have training programs. When you start putting people out on these other jobs that have no training programs, folks apply to work, and like Christopher said, if they go out there with no skills, then they end up misclassified on these jobs. They go out and get hired as a carpenter. The next week, they're paying them as a laborer. They don't have training programs. We all have training programs. We have to give the respect where it's due for the training programs that we provide and the dollar amount that we put into our training per year for anyone that knows nothing about the trade, starting from day one as a first-year apprentice right through our apprenticeship program. They can leave our apprenticeship programs debt-free with a career in front of them. And as far as the trade schools go, I think if collectively we all put more time and effort into supporting the trades at the Madison Park High School first before we start looking at building another trade school, then we're going to have a better opportunity to serve our people the way we serve them. We talk about another trade school. How about putting some time in at Madison Park? Thank you.
Yes, that's right. I agree.
I agree.
Out of my chairmanship role to just say yes to all of that, Charles. Go ahead, Priscilla, and then I'm going to ask my colleagues again if you have questions for our panelists in this round. Please raise your hand so I can make sure we give you an opportunity to do so, because we're going to be moving on to the second panel. Priscilla.
So I just want to say real quick, Charlie is right that they do need to be trained, and one of the problems with the unions is that they're not bringing the people in to train them, so the people have to go somewhere else to get trained. And then with Madison Park can be used in the evening to do training for people. That school is there. It took the place of girls and boys trade. Why aren't we utilizing it more for training?
Yeah, thank you for that. I know that Renee is on one of our panelists, and I know that Local 103 has been doing an amazing job in their partnership with Madison Park and really uplifting and creating many pathway opportunities for young people. So I cannot wait to create some space for you to talk a little bit about that, because I think that you guys have really done a great job at in those partnerships and also through your apprenticeship program. So I'm going to move on to our second panel. And we're going to kick things off with you, Renee.
All right, now, thanks for having me, everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ruthie, thank you, Councilor Louis-Jean, for inviting me.
Ruthie is fine. I'm Ruthie.
Okay, so I got some slides together. Is there any way that I sent it out. Someone can go through it or tell me how to share my screen? Beautiful.
Yeah, great. And I also just want to make note for the record that I had Angela lined up. She was supposed to be next, but I got ahead of myself because I was already talking about Local 103. So Angela, is that okay if we can just move in with, thank you, my love. Okay.
Thank you, Angela.
Also, if we can move in Brooke Woodson he's in the waiting room.
Brooke, just so you know, I've sent you 5 different requests to be promoted to a panelist. Can you just accept one so that you can get on in here, okay?
All right, you ready?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. All right. So my name is Renee Dozier. I am a 21-year member of Local 103, and I'm thankful to be here today because this is important work, and it needs to get done. And I'm just thankful to be a part of this conversation, and I want to be a part of the solution as well. So here with this slide here is IBW raising the standards for what we're doing to raise the standards for our DEI efforts in the construction industry. Next slide, please. Okay, so 93% of women starting their electrical careers in Massachusetts have chosen Local 103's apprenticeship program. So you can see from 2016, there was 18%, and up to 2022, we have 31%. So we are progressively getting better. And also 90% of people of color starting their electrical career in Massachusetts choose to join Local 103's apprenticeship program. We know this information because we have to register our apprentices, we have to get licenses. So, okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's just something from the Globe, Congresswoman Presley in the Greater Boston Labor Council, one of our wonderful partners, in Darlene Lambos. They were highlighted in talking about Local 103 and our progress being made. We still know that we have work to be done, but we are making progress. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have partnered with Millennial Partners, and we have these opportunity recruitment campaigns going on, and we set the stage across Boston construction industry for outreach for more residents and more Black and brown folks. So this multimedia campaign achieved historic results by leveraging geo-targeted advertising, social media, billboards, in addition to traditional print advertising in key outlets. Through the Opportunity Campaign, we nearly doubled our numbers of City of Boston residents applicants. And that's what everybody wants to hear, right? I know people, everything else is important, but the residents part and the people of color and women. So you see 2018, we have 687 as opposed to 2017, 352. Next slide. So this right here, I like the visual of this because I'm a picture person. So you see, this is our applicants, total applicants, 452, 57 women of color and 85 women. So most minority applicants ever for Boston Construction Union. So our Local 103, we're continuing this model since it's been working. Next slide, please. And another article reported favorably for our efforts. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the geo-targeted ads, because you know a lot of the young folks like the Snapchat and YouTube and Facebook, not so much the Facebook, but you know, different ways of letting people know what's available. So it's TV, you know, TV, Facebook, Pandora, and we target certain zip codes. So you know, trying to keep it Boston targeted. Next slide, please. And here's a sample of some of our things that we sent out on Snapchat, Facebook, Pandora. And if you guys watching, I don't personally watch, but if you're watching the baseball games, you see our ads there. We have lots of our apprentices and journey folks call us and say, "Hey, I was on the Fenway, whatever commercial, Boston residents." Next slide, please. Okay, so here are some of our targeted neighborhoods: Mattapan, Roxbury, Dorchester. So I hope you guys see them around. And here we go. We have one of our, this woman right here, she's an electrician. Her son actually just applied for the program, Boston residents. So yeah, this is something to be proud of right here. Next slide, please. And here is how our work is still continuing. One of these ladies here, she is a Madison Park graduate. We have some Millennial Partner apprentices and some women in our prefab shop that did not quite pass the exam, but there's another way to get in. That's the CW program, and we'll talk about that later. But in this picture here, we have our Boston residents. Just to say, we have our some of them are actually teachers at Wentworth and Benjamin Franklin Institute. Right. And this is the CW program I was mentioning. So if someone doesn't pass the mandated test to get into our local from the state of Massachusetts, we'll give them an opportunity. They can try it out, like a test drive of the electrical program. So it serves as an introduction to the trade and allows individuals to just try it out and see how they feel about working in the elements early morning, you know, and they still get the same benefits. They still get the wages as our apprentices get. So this is another way to get in. Next slide, please. And this is the advantage of Local 103. I get paid the same amount as the white man across the way. And that's just this, everything is equal across the board. This is what closes the gap, the wage gap. This is what we fought for so long to get these, you know, to get these standards and requirements put in place. So we have protected working conditions, debt-free education, earn while you learn, industry-leading wages, best healthcare, strong pension. We continually get wage increases as, you know, the years go, and we have the best training, unlimited advancement opportunities, discounted associate degree programs with Wentworth and Benjamin Franklin. And we are a community of brothers and sisters that have each other's back. Next slide, please. We also have a zero tolerance policy for disrespect on to anybody on the job. If anything happens, you speak up. we're trying to kill that culture of, don't say anything if something happens. And so we have a zero tolerance policy for discrimination, harassment, bullying, and so forth. And these stickers are they're hard hat stickers. They're in our bathrooms. They're on the job sites and so on. Next slide, please. And this is some.
I just wanted to let you know that the timer went off a few minutes ago, but I wanted to be super mindful and respectful. Just wanted to see how many more slides you had.
Okay, I'll wrap it up. So we have women community committees. Just same thing, union women get paid the same as our male counterparts. You can go to the next slide, please. And we have minority caucuses. So if there's any issues, we handle it in-house. We have any, we uplift each other. We help each other get educated, and all kinds of initiatives. And it's truly a brotherhood. Next slide. And then now I'll wrap it up. I'm sorry. And this is our Empower DEI initiative. We hired a full-time DEI coordinator to help bridge the gaps so we can get out from the CW level, apprentice level, to to get folks to open their own businesses, our minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses. So we want to make sure that everybody has a fair shake at this thing. All right, I'll stop now.
Thank you, Renee. You're done?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
And then
you.
don't worry, there'll be an opportunity for you to expand during the Q&A portion of it. So if you didn't get to go through it all, there's definitely a lot of time for you to do so in the round of questions, okay?
Thank you.
So I'm gonna move on next to Angela. Thank you so much for your grace, and do really appreciate you allowing Renee to go first. So, Angela, you now have the floor and 5 minutes, okay?
I'm going to try to keep it to 5 minutes, young lady. Thank you. Good morning, elected members of the Boston City Council, members of the committee, the administration, the panel, and all who have tuned in to learn what is going on in our community and how you can get involved. None of this work is done in isolation. We must be at the table. We must stand up, speak out for changes and accountability. Before I get in, I want to embrace the focus of a working group, because I too feel that twice a year is not enough. There's so many things that happen within that 6 months and we know that changes need to take place, so there should be a focused working group. As it relates to Janine and the human capacity within that workforce office should be increased. It's not a one-person job. So that needs to be looked at if we are truthfully talking about making changes, having availability. It looks good on paper, but is it truthfully functional? So that needs to happen. Another thing that was touched on, although the ordinance was revised under former Mayor Walsh, the legal team at the time did not support including the wage matrix in the amendment. So that is why the federal has accountability, but the state doesn't. So that is something we definitely need to revisit, as well as amend, along with any other things that comes out of this. Because sitting at the table in Roxbury with the monitoring committee, it is extremely frustrating, to the point that Priscilla brought up earlier, because we keep asking for the same thing, especially Miss Dorothea Jones. She'll ask for the same thing over and over, and every time we get together, we're still at ground zero. So this becomes very important. Now I'll go into my piece. The Boston Employment Commission was created to enforce the Boston Resident Jobs Policy, a policy born out of the Boston This policy was approved in 1983 to set employment standards for Boston residents, i.e. Blacks, Native Americans, Latinos, Asians, and women that historically have been marginalized and excluded from employment opportunities on private and public development projects in the city of Boston. 40 years later, the Boston Resident Construction Employment Standard have yet to meet its employment goals for Boston residents. And the Boston Employment Commissions have yet to issue any sanctions to developers, contractors who have been non-compliant. Over the years, when asked, why is this happening? The reply is, the city does not have the authority. As a matter of fact, to quote Ms. Barrios Milner at a commissioner monthly meeting, she stated, the city simply cannot enforce the workforce participation goal the ordinance lays out. Another response to the question, why is this like this? John Barrios spoke to GBH News regarding the legal challenge for the city. He stated, if we don't do it right, we end up potentially risk losing entire programs. The community's response to these statements is, then let's do it right. The employment standard policy sets goals for residents of Boston to be employed on construction projects, whether union or open shop sites. And the developers, private or not, receive some form of benefits from the city. Unfortunately, while residents of Boston continue to endure the insecurities of insufficient funds to meet their daily basic standards of living due to the exclusion and access to jobs in the construction field, project developers, contractor subs continue to benefit from the ongoing financial boom in and around Boston. There are numerous concerns from the community regarding accountability and the lack of all-inclusive effective oversight of the Boston Resident Jobs Policy Employment Standards Ordinance. There is a fundamental need for change. Together, let's make that change. Let's make the change the policy was intended to bring about 40 years ago. We cannot expect change if we keep embracing the same non-functional practices. The BRJP policy has very good data collection form. If and when used, the data collection will stand up in court. But to cross this threshold, the usage of these forms must be enforced, and all parties must be held accountable to the intent of the standard. This hearing is to review the Boston Employment Commission and the Boston Resident Jobs Policy. The intent of the review is to examine its purpose, assess its outcome, and institute changes where necessary. After 40 years of non-compliant practices and no record of sanctions imposed, the Boston Jobs Coalition recommends the following. Requirement for changes. The data on the following. The methodology of community outreach.
I'm sorry. Angela, I know, I wanted you to know I'm giving you a little bit of extra grace, but if you could just, I don't know how many recommendations you have, but if you could just, how many are there and how much more time you need? Because I have Dorothea Jones who's lined up next, and then we also have a special guest that was not intended for part of it.
For some of the recommendations, we need to address the developers, contractors, bona fide address of employees. Are these contractors living in or outside of the city of Boston? Compliance to the projects, the trades, the union, open shops. It is important, and in order for us to be able to make changes, we have to have a benchmark, and right now we don't.
Thank you. Thank you, Angela. Thank you. I'm going to move on now to Dorothea Jones. You now have the floor and 5 minutes.
I am going to try to comply with the 5 minutes. I want to say good morning, everybody, and thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak. My name is Dorothea Jones, and I am a member of the Roxbury Strategic Master Plan Oversight Committee. And under that committee, they created Dan Richardson and Darnell Williams, who were co-chairs of the Oversight Committee. They charged me with starting a monitoring committee, which monitors the construction projects and developments in the Nubian Square area. And I have been doing that with others for at least 15 years. We've done it through the administration of Chuck Turner, Tito Jackson, and Kim Janey, and we're looking forward to doing that with Councilor Anderson. Some of the projects that we have monitored are the Area B Police Station, the Bowling Building, Whittier Street Health Center, the Dudley Elderly Building on Washington Street, Madison Park Developments on Washington Street, Tropical Foods, as well as Bartlett Yard. Some of these projects, especially if they had an affirmative action officer on the site, they were able to make sure that they kept records of who was applying for jobs, who was job ready, who was not job ready, and providing information so that people that wanted to work in construction in this community could be hired or get the training that they needed. As everyone knows, the whole purpose of the Oversight Committee is to create wealth and to generate wealth in our community. In my opinion, without a doubt, the construction sites in Roxbury, when you look at what the BRJP does or is supposed to do, it looks fine on paper, but in reality, it is a dismal failure. The policy, if it seeks to further economic inclusion, and provide and promote economic opportunities for Boston residents, people of color, and women, they fail 100%. In the Nubian Square area, we have a 51-51-15 policy, 51 people of color, 51 Boston residents, and 15% women. And oftentimes we don't meet that goal. And we don't meet that goal because we do not have the force of the city, the awarding authorities, the BJRP, or any other entities that are speaking out and supporting the policy in the way that they need. If the policy is an opportunity for city residents to participate on city-funded construction projects and to be able to direct if the city council and others want to direct city public expenditures to our city residents so that they can get jobs and training, it is a complete and dismal failure, in my opinion. There needs to be employment opportunities on all of the construction projects. There's no reason there are not opportunities to bring apprentices on, because you have a 4-year level of apprentice and you can bring apprentices on and they don't need training. They can be brought on and begin to work towards building a profession for themselves and for their families. And one of the things that I would recommend, just like our monitoring committee is based on volunteers, I think that in every section of the city, where Mattapan, Dorchester and Roxbury continuing, I think there should be monitoring committees, and the city councilors should set up committees of community residents that want to monitor the jobs in their community to see how many of those residents are being employed on these construction sites. We can say a whole lot of pretty words, but if we don't do the actions that are going to uplift our people, we all fail. The city fails, the leadership fails, the awarding authorities fail, the BJRP office, if they are not, they said that they had seven compliance measures, two of which are the pre-construction meetings, getting the certified payrolls and collective actions. And I'm focusing on those three because pre-construction meetings, if they're held, they are not held with all subcontractors. They are not held with second and third level contractors. And that's a failing because right then they know they're not going to follow the policy and nobody makes sure that they are following the policy. Not any of the awarding authorities, whether it's Parks and Recreation, Public Utilities, BJRP, or the D&D. None of them are making sure that the policy is followed and that citizens of this city, and especially Black people, are not being hired on the jobs. And I see that you want to say something quick to me, and I have a lot to say because I've been hearing a lot of words coming out, and everybody is trying not to step on people's toes. Sometimes you have to step on people's toes if you're going to make change. If you don't want to make change and you want to sit and say pretty words and make it sound like there is something being done, then by all means do that. But I'm not that kind of a person, don't intend to be, and never will be. I want some leadership. I want leadership to step up and be accountable to the people that are electing them. If you can't do that, then I think everybody needs to go home and figure out a way where they are going to be accountable to the most vulnerable of the people that live in our community so that they can be uplifted and they can share in the wealth and the resources of this great city.
Yes, and if you had a mic, it would be a drop mic moment right now, Ms. Jones. And so I do appreciate the urgency, and I hope you all know and don't get jealous because I've allowed everyone to go a little bit over. I just want, for the disclaimer, you can review the tape that everybody had an opportunity to go a little bit over. And because I think this is something that, you know, it's important for us to recognize that accountability is 360. And as the council, we approve the budget. And so we also need to recognize the role that we have played in getting us here, right? So the administration, the city council, the contractors, this has to be all hands on deck to get us to where we need to be. And I agree, we hear a lot of the same old blah, 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 but now it's time for some real action. And I'm really encouraged by the sense of urgency that we are bringing here today, and the commitment to each of you. I've been asked and advised by Councilor Louis Jean that we're gonna add one more person to the panel. So I am going to ask Brooke Wilson, you will have the floor. You are the director of the trade partner at the diversity for Suffolk Construction. So I'm not sure if I'm going to give you 5 minutes since you're an add-on. I might give you 3. I'm just joking. I'm going to give you 5 minutes and that's it. And when the timer goes off, I will put you on mute. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Councilor Louis Jen, for inviting me to speak today. I have a long history with this program. I got my professional start working for Bruce Bowling, who has been acknowledged as the author of the BRJP ordinance, and then I was also ran the BRJP office for many years, working with people like Dorothea Jones. One of the things that we did is we did open up that process of how the monitoring gets done. I co-chaired the Access and Opportunity Monitoring Committees with Chuck Turner at the B2 High School at the Bowling Building. And through that processes, I know everyone is still highly frustrated where the numbers are overall, but I would say I've seen the trajectory where the numbers for people of color and women through BRJP has gone up. If you look back to the numbers that were presented at the beginning of this hearing, to see that women are almost at 10% and people of color over 30%. That was really unthinkable when we started doing this work. It's a testament to everybody here. Brian Doherty, Charlie Cofield, they've been great partners in this work and making this happen. We all are still very frustrated that we're not moving the needle with Boston residents. I would say from my perspective, I totally agree that we need to use Madison Park High School, reimagine how it's used so that we can get the volume of Boston residents and people of color we need to hit these goals. I really think we should be driving it by the supply side. Priscilla approached me several months ago about the evening program at Madison Park. She indicated it's fine that we train these kids, but we have all kinds of adults in the community who aren't working. So I'm working with Charlie Cofield right now to get the graduates of that program into apprenticeship opportunities. In fact, there's going to be a meeting on Monday night where those graduates of that program are going to an info session with the Carpenters, and Charlie has pledged to work with them to help them get placed. And once they get into the union, we have pledged to place them on Suffolk construction projects. So I think, you know, again, I get the passion, the energy, but I think we have to step back at some point and look at some of the progress that has been made and then regroup and think about how we can proceed. And I really appreciate the leadership of the new members of the City Council. Councilor Worrell has reached out to me on several occasions. Obviously, Councilor Louis Jen has. Councilor Mejia, this is the second time I'm before your committee, so I know you're leading on these issues. You're driving these issues. We want the change. I think we can get there. I appreciated Local 103 showing those slides where they talked about our Project Winthrop Center and the things we're doing with Local 103. There are tremendous efforts here. They just need to be better coordinated, I think, and they need to be driven to scale a bit more so we can really move the needle on getting more Boston residents working on these projects. Thank you for having me.
Oh, Brooke, you're trying to show off. You did that in 5 minutes. No, and you know what?
No, I'm brief and to the point.
No, I love it. And you bring a lot of historical perspective too, right? And so I just want you to know you got 2 more minutes, and I would love to, you know, give you an opportunity if you have anything else to say. And if not, I would create an opportunity for my colleagues to begin asking questions. But I'm so glad that you came on as an addition to this panel, because I think the historical perspective and also the longevity, right? It's like we need to think about the outcome, but I believe the process and how we go about getting there is just as equally as important. And I think you being in the space for as long as you have, and now being in the position that you're in, can really help move that.
I greatly appreciate that. Now, I'm happy to answer any questions or contribute any way you can and lend whatever historical perspective I can to this hearing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So with that said, I'm going to move on to questions from my council colleagues. And we're going to start off with the lead sponsor, which are Councilor Louis Jen, followed by Brian Worrell, then Councilor Tanya Fernandez-Anderson, and then if any of my colleagues are still with us, I'll make sure to call on you. So Councilor Louis Jen, you now have the floor and 5 minutes. And you're on mute.
Rookie mistake. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I also just want to thank everyone for being here. It is a wide diversity of thought and people that we brought together, and that was very intentional, because I think there are folks with a lot of institutional knowledge and a lot of different takes on the successes and or failures of BRJP. So, you know, shout out to the Boston Jobs Coalition, to the union folks on the line. I guess my question, my first question, I think, would be directed towards Angela and Dorothea regarding rebuilding out the capacity of the office and what's needed there. If you have thoughts on, what we can be pushing for from within City Hall when it comes to capacity building around VRJP. I know, Angela, you had mentioned, I just wanted to make sure that we had clarification around what capacity building of that office would look like. Or should look like.
Understanding is that in the workforce development area, Janine is by herself. I have attended a few workshops, and the level of work that is needed, the level of attention, the data collection, the outreach, the putting together of these various job fairs, that is not a one-person job. And right now, she is solo. So I think it's, when I first spoke with her or heard about it, I was like, this office is being set up to fail because it's, you can't do the level of outreach that you need to do to bring people in. So
we're getting some feedback from somewhere. Maybe.
I think it's Dorothea. You might not be on mute. There you go. Thanks.
I think that one of the things, there has to be more collaboration with the unions to make sure that people from different trades are getting the kind of training and skill building needed to go on construction sites. It's easy for the Carpenters Union, the Laborers Union, and maybe a little more so, but still under the level of carpenter and laborer for the Electrical Workers Union. But there are many, many trades that are used on construction sites. And most of those trades are not training people from within our community. They are not training women. Maybe it's a lack of information coming to them in a timely manner, but whatever it is, I think that needs to be altered. I think also these awarding agencies like Parks and Recs and Public Utilities, I think they do a very poor job of making sure that on the projects that they are the awarding authority, that there are not enough people of color, Boston residents, and women on those jobs. And one of the things that has been habitual in the 15 plus years that I have been monitoring construction projects is the people of color are mostly coming from outside. That is why the numbers of Boston residents remain so low. And that has to
because what happened was that Angela was speaking, and then there was some background noise to you and because we thought, so it was, I don't know if it's me.
I'm very sorry if I cut Angela off because I
you did
too.
Hold on, it actually might be you, Julia.
Is it me?
It might be you. Yeah.
Okay, so Angela, go. I'm sorry, that was my mistake.
I'm all set because Dorothea is hitting on everything that needs to be said. So go ahead, Ms. Jones.
I would also say that the city councilors have a responsibility to their constituents. Please do not leave your constituents who have been left out and marginalized for decades upon decades with this city. Please speak up for them, take action for them so that they can feel that this city also belongs to them.
Thank you, Dorothea. I think you brought up a good point. And we were looking at the data, we actually saw that the compliance numbers, the percentages were higher on private projects than they were on public projects. And you'd expect us to be getting it a lot better than on our project. So I think that is a really valid point and something that my office will definitely be looking into. Another question.
I just wanted to just be mindful of let you know that the timer has gone off. If you have one more question, you're more than welcome to ask, but I want you to know that we have the two other co-sponsors that are on deck for questions. So I just want to make sure that if you do have another question, if you're going to ask them the second round of questions, it'd be good to know that as well.
No, I for now, I think I have one more question. Another question may come up, but I have one more question right now for.
Okay, so go ahead and ask your one more question, and then I just want to, on deck next will be Councilor Roel, followed by Councilor Tanya Fernandez-Anderson, and if any of my colleagues are still on the call, I'll call on you next.
Thank you. This question is targeted towards Brooke and Renee and Mr. Cofield. If you're in a place where you can speak, I know you were in transit, you know, you all talk to us, you know, I'm sure there's obviously successes still, challenges still within Suffolk and within IBW and the Carpenters, but to the extent that you present data, the things that you guys are getting right, what are your counterparts? What are you doing that your counterparts aren't doing, either in construction or in unions, to make sure that we are getting those numbers up? Or what makes it easier for you to be able to do that compared to others?
I really can't speak about others. I know one thing at Suffolk, and Dorothea brought this point up, it's really important that each and every subcontractor working on the project does have a pre-construction meeting where all these requirements are reviewed, and they have to submit a plan for how they're going to do it. They have to submit projections. We do that on all our projects with all our contractors, right? Everybody's responsible for hitting the goals, right? So we're not just relying on certain trades. Somebody else made the point, it might have even been Dorothea, it's not just the labor, it's not just the carpenters. We have to get the mechanical trades to be more diverse. That's why, again, I'll beat on the same drum. You know, it's really important that we train Boston residents for these highly skilled, licensed trades, which are not the easiest ones, but they're often the most lucrative ones. So it's the plumbing, it's the electrical. 103 is a great partner, right? They're doing incredible things with diversity. But that's really where we're going to move the needle. But it is really each and every tier that needs to participate if we're going to get close to meeting these goals when it comes to Boston residents.
I agree. And I really can't speak on what other people are doing, you know what I mean? But I can say that we've been throwing this word intentional around a lot today, right? But we are intentional about who we target, right? So we go into Madison Park. We have partners with Madison Park, and we go to job fairs around the city, and in the community centers, in the churches, in the schools, and it really is just letting folks know that this is available to you, and telling the moms and the dads that, you know, some folks want their children just to go to college, but, you know, we have partnerships with college. So it's just getting that, getting people exposed to the opportunity, and then we have a once a year application. So it's in November, and sometimes people will get frustrated. They don't want to wait till November, and then so it's a process. It really is. But I can't speak to what other people are doing, but I do know that we are intentional about the mentoring piece and the recruitment piece, and just making sure that folks know that there's someone before you and you got to pull up someone behind you. So.
Thank you for that. Councilor Louis-Jean?
Oh, I think Charlie just got off mute.
Okay.
Just real quickly, I just wanted to say that our intentions in trying to make these numbers better range from our information and orientation session that we have once a month. We don't just have once a year. Not saying anything about any other trade, but we have our information and orientation session once a month. We get over 200 applicants in our session. We can't bring everybody in because we're not getting the phone calls from all of the contractors for manpower needs, because they're trying to bring folks in from other places. Not that we are accepting sometimes what they're trying to do, but we're letting them know that we have to meet these goals, as well as our partnerships with all the other trades. We're working together with all the trades so much closer than we have in the past, and we are one team. If they don't want to come into Carpenters, we point them to the electricians, plumbers, pipe fitters, tin knockers, whatever, and making sure that there's a place for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Charlie. And I know that a lot of the trades are out there doing really great work. I know Renee at the IBEW has hired a DEI person who's committed, who's in community. So I just thank you for, there are lots of challenges, but there's also some progress. And I thank you all for, your commitment to being in these spaces that, also are not difficult for you all. And so I appreciate the work and the effort that you all are putting in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lujan. I'm going to move on now to Councilor Worrell. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm excited to see so many fierce and passionate advocates fighting for jobs, for Black and brown people right here in the city of Boston. Very important. And I know in past hearings, there was the idea of an advisory committee. Was that ever established? And if it wasn't, I would love to, try to help establish and convene, whether it's the unions to talk about best practices, the advocates to give us the policy recommendations. That way we're having a discussion to everyone's point more than twice a year. The other point I would like to make too is I believe that Vote Tech should be in every school in the city of Boston. We just looked at some data, I think yesterday, there's 15,364 9 to 12th graders inside of Boston Public Schools. And yes, Madison could be a pivotal, a real critical part of it, but I believe that option needs to be, available to all of our Boston Public School students. But yes, just wanted to see if, the advisory committee, was that ever established from last year's conversation? And if not, I would love to work with everyone in this group to help create that so this discussion is ongoing.
Thank you for that. Anyone is interested in answering that?
I will. I think an advisory committee is a great step forward. But I think if the advisory committee is not going to press the city, then I think an advisory committee, everybody gets tired of just saying words. We really, I'm almost 80 years old. I am never going to work in a job, but my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, your grandchildren, your children, they need equity. And if we don't fight, if someone like me that is over the hill, if I'm not fighting for these young people, then what purpose do I serve? And we all have to determine, are we going to fight? And I mean fight for these young people so that they are, here we have all of these contractors that are making money head over hands, benefiting from the Boston jobs residency policy. What benefit are our young people gaining from it? None. And that's where we need to put up the fight. We need to charge these developers that come into the city. Many of them don't live in the city, have no intention of living in the city, and don't even have an intention of hiring people from our city. So we have to make sure that they are not the only ones benefiting by the Boston jobs residency policy. We have to stand up for these young people so that they don't feel their option is pulling out a gun and hurting somebody in order to feed their family.
Thank you. Councilor Worrell?
Yeah, and I saw Mr. Lima come on camera. I'm not sure if he wanted to weigh in.
I just wanted to respond to the comment about the advisory committee. I'm happy to follow up with counselors about that. I think this is the first time that I'm hearing about the prospect of an advisory committee, though I imagine that this has been, these were conversations that were had either last year or before I was in this role, but I'm happy to explore that with counselors in the future to bring some more input into the BRJP and BEC process. Although the Boston Employment Commission hearings are public meetings that occur every month, and the commissioners do a wonderful job of making sure that voices are heard there. So I do want to call out Commissioner Burton, Commissioner Cofield, and other commissioners who are not with us today in their attempts and success in making those hearings open to the public and a conversation.
I see Priscilla's hands up as well.
Yes, I like the idea of the advisory committee, but I mean, that's just more people having to come out for more meetings. And we, Dorothea, Angela, myself, we have been attending these meetings for years. And we don't see no change. That's the issue. When are we going to see some change? And I agree with Dorothea about our children. Our children are out here shooting and killing each other because they can't find work. And it's not fair and it's not right. And something needs to be done for real, for real. No more talk. Talk is cheap. I'm about action.
Talk is expensive these days because right now when nothing happens, it costs us every single cent right now. And so I appreciate that. Councilor Morrell, I just want to be really super mindful that the time has gone off.
And the last thing, Madam Chair, sorry, Ms. Williams-Mitchell, if you could send me those lists of recommendations, or anyone on this call, list of recommendations. Love to explore those. And just also want to advocate to revising the Boston Residents Job Policy to at least include wage and, strengthen that more so we can enforce, heftier fines and hold those not in compliant accountable. Thank you.
Will do.
Thank you. I'm going to move on now to Councilor Tanya Fernandez-Anderson. You now have the floor in 5 minutes, and we're still going to do public testimony, and I'm going to ask central staff to see if we have any and just to let us know so that we can give an opportunity for my colleagues to do closing remarks and we can move things along. Councilor Tanya Fernandez-Anderson, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I actually don't have any questions. I think that, I'm looking forward for whether this is going to go to a working session or next hearing. I rather reserve my energy for us to actually dive into this and figure out solutions on ensuring that we're actually doing what we need to do. I won't say what we are supposed to be doing because I think that people have good intentions and may be working to the best of their ability with the resources offered. And sometimes it means that we have to re-strategize the formula and recreate the metrics or whatever we have to do, or implement efforts that actually are more, best practice proven. So I think, with that in mind, hopefully we are all looking to do the right thing and ensure equity in the city of Boston. I look forward to that work. And again, I just don't want to I just don't want to keep talking. I just want to get to it. I just want to see what is the problem and what can we do about it.
Thank you. I know that, and I so appreciate your eloquence and your call to action, because that's exactly what I think this moment requires. And I see that, Renee, you have your hands up and would love to give you the floor.
Thank you. I can feel the frustration, and I'm with you, with everybody with the frustration. And I'm a construction worker, so I like to work with my hands. I like to see what I've done with my hands. I like to see the results. But I think everybody here is on the same page, and I really think relationships should. I'm a newbie, right? So I know you guys have been here a lot longer than me, but relationships is the way that we can close the gap, because I personally I'm biased to unions. I'm a union. I raised my family in union, blah, blah, blah. But I think that that's the best way to close the wage gap. And I think that relationships, and if you, Brian Doherty has so many with the Greater Boston Labor Council, we have so many opportunities, and he has a list of when the apprenticeships open, and just flood it into everywhere that we need to. Like, there's a way to get to fix this. I know it, and or maybe I'm being young and naive, but I feel like we can fix this and we could do better. And I feel the frustration, and rightfully so. But I feel like we can fix it.
Yeah. I appreciate that sentiment. And I think that and I think I probably said this earlier, is that Boston is resource rich, but coordination poor. And there's there's a lot of things already happening, but we are all working oftentimes in our own silos. And I think we have an opportunity to really break down those walls, literally, and get to working and rebuilding as a collaborative, instead of fighting and doing this like we do all the time. Is that everybody here has a role to play in moving this work forward. And I think that in the true spirit of collaboration is the way that we need to move. And I look forward to not only continuing this conversation, but to the comments that I made earlier, is that, this every 2 years is not enough. And I do agree with Charles. And my hope is that there's another committee that I chair, which is Government Accountability and Transparency and Accessibility, that I think through that lens that we might have an opportunity to dive in a little bit deeper into some of the accountability factors and pieces that does not relate to this specific biannual situation. So that's, I'll be looking at that with my team to see if we can work alongside the lead sponsors to kind of really shepherd this work along in a way that's going to be forward moving. But I would love to to check in with the central staff to see if we had any public testimony. And I also would like to give my colleagues an opportunity, if they have closing remarks, to raise their hand. And if you're interested in closing remarks, this would be the time to do so before we move to public testimony.
Before public testimony?
I don't think we have, I don't know if we have any public testimony.
Okay.
Central staff, if you could, is anyone signed? Because I don't see anyone. No. So okay. we could move. So I'll just say thank you. I have 101 questions, but I asked them in 2021, 2020, and you already know how where we land, and we're here for the work and working in partnership with each of you. So I'm not gonna hog up the mic. I'm gonna kick it over to Counselor. Whoever wants to have any closing remarks, just thank the panelists for your thought leadership, for your passion, for your commitment to this work. And we're gonna keep this in committee, but I'd like to ask my colleagues if they have any closing remarks. This would be the time to raise your hand to share them. Councilor Louis-Jen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank everyone again who came to this space to work towards attaining the spirit of BRJP. And I just want to make sure that we're working towards attainables, so that 6 months from now, right, this is a biennial review, we're not asking the same questions, so that we feel like we're moving the ball forward. And so the things that, hopefully between now and then we hope to be able to explore is and know more about is disaggregation of data by race regarding those compliance numbers. Also, I heard Councilor Flaherty mention this, the city and the administration's ability to lean into the ordinance a bit more and be less fearful of drawing those lawsuits, because what good is an ordinance if you're not willing to back it up and go to bat for it? Hopefully we can work alongside the administration to get there. Also, some other really great ideas around exploring advisory committees. So hopefully that's something that we could talk about. Again, not for us, more talk if it's not leading to anything, but if it's a serious proposal. I also want to shout out JC, the new commissioner of BAC. I think we heard with her when she spoke, incredible intention to really use the carrots and sticks of the BRJP to hopefully move the needle. and, you know, a lot of intentionality around Madison Park. So hopefully we can lean in there and continue to do the work. I think in terms of the capacity building of the office, it's something that I want to look into in partnership with a lot of Dorothea's suggestions around community monitors. So I just want to thank everyone for bringing their honesty and their work to this space as we try to make sure that people in the city of Boston, Black folk, people of color, women are able to, you know, be at the table and not just on the menu and really participate in the prosperity of the city. So thank you, everyone. You're on mute, Chair.
Yes. Just curious if any other of my colleagues are interested in closing remarks. You're more than welcome to do so. I see Brian, Councilor Royal, your hand is up, so you now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I won't belabor a point, but I'm here to get to work. So please feel free to give me a call, send me the emails, and let's do this. Let's do this because our community, our people, they need it, and they're expecting us to do it. So I'm here to fight. So I'm here.
Yes, I'm so incredibly encouraged by the council colleagues that I have, because we have already hit the ground running, rolling up, as you could see, the sleeves to get the work done. And I really do appreciate Dorothea specifically calling us out in calling us into action. So we hear you, we appreciate you, and trust that we will be doing the work in collaboration with community and those other stakeholders. So thank you all for being here. Without further ado, as the chair, I will move to recommend that this ought to stay in our committee. But for now, I'm going to call this hearing to a close. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.